Section number 40 is an introduction to graphing. So, first thing we should talk about is the coordinate system, the x and the y-axis. Each of those lines I drew are number lines. On the x-axis, you have, so this is the x-axis, left and right. Right here in the middle is 0, and 1, and 2, and 2 1/3, and 3, and the square root of 10, and 4, and 4.13, and 5. Has every number. Numbers other than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are other numbers than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know, there's -1, and -2, and -3, and -4, and also negative the square root of 15, and -0.003. There's numbers other than the counting numbers. And the y-axis is a number line. On the y-axis, the number right here is 0. 0 and 1 and 2. Above the x-axis are the positive y numbers. Below the x-axis are the negative y values. And again, there are numbers other than what I listed. There's -3.5, there's -9.4, there's 11.3. There's numbers other than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But since we have limited space and time, we'll just list the counting numbers. We'll just list the counting numbers. But there are other numbers. Now, if somebody asks you what point that is, a point has two numbers. One number, comma, another number. The first number is an x value, the second number is a y value. Many times I'll ask people, what point is that? And they'll say 7. No, absolutely not. I don't even have to look at the graph to know you're wrong. Because you know this student is wrong. Why? Very, very simple answer. They didn't give me two numbers. If they said 7, -2, then I look to see if they're right. Like if I ask you, what is that point? And you just tell me 7. I'm like, no. No, it's not 7. Why? Because it has to have two numbers. Until you give me two numbers, you're not giving me the right answer. Now, how do you decide what the two numbers are? Piece of cake. To find the x value, go down to the x-axis and read it off. 3. Find the y value, go across to the y-axis and read it off. That is 3, 2. There's no doubt in my mind that's right because we checked. We read it off. If you were asked what this point right here is, remember you have to give two numbers. Well, go to the x-axis, read it off. This time we go to the y-axis, we have to go to the right. But that doesn't matter. Read it off. 3. So I ask you, what is this point right here? Well, the x-axis looks to me like 1.5. The y value looks to me like -2. You would read that as 1.5, comma, -2. This point right here, well, get your hands dirty. Look up to the x-axis, read it off, -1. Go to the y-axis, read it off, -4. thing you can't do is, say for this point, you can't go on an angle. You can't say, oh, x is -5 and the y is -1. No, 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 no. Straight up and down, left and right. Okay, that's the only thing you can't do. If you want to know what point this is, you look straight up, you see -3. You look straight across, you also happen to see -3, and that's the point. Okay, so now, what if I asked you this point right here? Okay, well, you don't have to go up or down very far to get to the x-axis. You're right there, and it is 5. Now, to get the y value, you go across to the y-axis. Now remember, this here is the y-axis, or at least it's part of it. The number that you expect to see right there, right there, right there on the y-axis, the number you expect to see right there is good old 0. That's 5, 0. What if the point is, that was a point on the x-axis, y was 0. What if you're a point on the y-axis? Here's your y-axis, here is your x-axis. 1, 2, 3, 4. What is this point right here? Well, remember, here is your x-axis. And when you go from that point straight down, the number that you see right here, right where the arrow is pointing, on the x-axis, that's 0. And on the y-axis, you don't have to go too far to get to the y-axis. You're right there. It's 3. That's 0, 3. -1, -2, -3, -4. What if you are right here? Okay, let's number it correctly. What if you are right there? Oh, I need to know the x and the y value. Well, to know the x value, you look up to the x-axis. And right there is 0. And the y value, you don't have to go too far. You're right there. It's -2. What is that point? What is that point? Well, both x and y are 0 there. That's called the origin. Called the origin. Where x and y are both 0, it's origin. Okay, so I applied some points and we listed the coordinates, the x and y values. This time, I'm going to give you the x and y values, and you're going to have to plot the points. We're going to reverse the game. Okay? We want to say plot 1, -2, 2, 4, -3, -1, -1, 2, 0, 5, and -3, 0. We want to plot those 6 points. Plot with the P. And here is our good old coordinate system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. -1, -2, -3, etc. -1, -2, -3, -4, etc. Remember, first x and then y. I would think of starting at the origin. X is 1, that brings me right there. And y is negative 2, so I go down 2. Here it is. That is the point. And you can verify it. When you look up, you see 1, and when you look to the y-axis, you see negative 2. That's the point 1, negative 2. The next point, 2, 4. Go to 2 on the x, and then go up 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's your point. The circle I put there, that's not a point. Maybe you even shouldn't put there. Put your pen there, your pencil there. Go over 2 and then up 4. And then put a mark. That's 2, 4. I mean, I know it is. When I look down, I see 2. And when I look across, I see 4. There's no way that's not 2, 4. There's no way that's not 2, 4. Negative 3, negative 1. Go to negative 3 on the x, and then go down 1, which looks like right there. That's negative 3, 1 right there. Negative 3, 1. Maybe it would have been better if I numbered them on top. That's negative 3, 1. Right here. Negative 3, comma, negative 1. Alright. Negative 1, 2. So you go over 1 and then you go up 2. Right there. That is negative 1, 2. I know it is. Because when I look down, I see 1, and when I look across, I see 2. 0, 5. So, I don't move from the origin, but I do, now I go up 5. If it was 1, 5, I would have moved over 1, and then go up 5. But the x value was 0. Okay, the next one, I don't like what it says. How about it says negative 8, 0? So you got a negative 8 on the x-axis, which is right there. And then you go up or down 0. That is, you stay right there. You stay right there. That is negative 8, 0. Okay, you need to practice this. You need to know where the points are located. The hardest ones are, I guess, when you're on the axes. You have to be able to say, that last point I put, negative 8, 0. You have to say, Noah, when I go to the x-axis, which is this number line, right where that arrow is pointing, right where this arrow is, I see the number 0 on the y-axis. Okay. Let's talk about one last thing. That is called quadrants. The xy axes break up the plane, in this case, the whiteboard, into 4 regions. Quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. If you are on the axis, on the x-axis or the y-axis, you are not in any quadrant. You will not be in any quadrant if you are on the axis. Every other point is in quadrant 1, 2, 3, or 4. The other, if you're on the axes, you are not in a quadrant. So I'm going to list some points, and I would love for you to tell me, or I guess I would love to tell you, which quadrant they're in. -2, 3. The x is -2. You start at the origin, you go 2 to the left. I meant to only go 2, excuse me. And then you go up 3. 1, 2, 3. I'm in quadrant 2. This is in quadrant 2. 4, -1. You go 4 on the x, which brings you right there. Then you go down 1. That brings you into quadrant 4. 3, -3, -2. You start at the origin, and you go to the left 3. That brings you right there. Then you go down 2. 1, 2. That brings you into quadrant 3. And if you had 4, 5, well, you start at the origin, you go 4 to the right, and then you go up 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Brings you right there. Quadrant 1. If you have 0, 7. So you start at the origin and you go to the left or right, none. Then you go up 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The answer is none. No quadrant. If it was 0, -7, same thing. You start at the origin and you go to the left or the right, 0. But then you go down 7. That brings you on the y-axis. It is in no quadrant. What if you had 3, 0? This says you go to the right 3. It brings you right here. And then you go up or down, nothing. You don't go up or down any. No quadrant. Which quadrant are you in? None. That was for +3. If it was -3, well then you would start at the origin, you would start at the origin and then go 3 to the left. It would bring you right there. And then you go up or down 0. That leaves you right there. That's none. So if the x is 0, you're not in the quadrant. If the y is 0, you're not in the quadrant. If you were 0, 0, you're not in any quadrant. Which quadrant are you in? None of them. Because that, let me redraw the axes again, say right here. 0, 0 is both on the x and the y axis. If you're on any of the axes, you are not in the quadrant. In quadrant 1, the x is positive, because any point on the x-axis, if I look down to the x-axis, it would be positive numbers. Because this is where the positive x's are. To the left of the origin will be the negatives. And y's are also positive. Because when I look to the y-axis, I'm always above the origin. That's where y's are positive. In quadrant 2, the y's are still positive. But any point I pick in quadrant 2, it brings me to positive y values. But the x values, they're negative. The x values, this x value is negative. These are the negative x values. X is negative in quadrant 2. In quadrant 3, you have the same x's. You have the negative x's. You know what? The y's are also negative. This point down here, the y value is negative. The y is also negative. In quadrant 4, where we wrote all over the place, let's clean that up a little bit. And let's talk about the x and the y's. The values, they're always positive. They're always positive because it's on the positive half. But the y values are negative because the y values all come from those numbers. This y value comes from there. This y value comes from there. This y value right way over here, it comes from that y value. They're all negative. So it's best if you can just see that anytime you need to know what quadrant you're in. That is, if I give you a point 3, 4, which means positive 3, positive 4. X is positive, y is positive. You can't be in quadrant 4 because y is not positive. You can't be in quadrant 3 because y is not positive, or if you prefer to say x is not positive. You couldn't be in quadrant 2 because x is not positive, it's negative. You're in quadrant 1 because they're both positive. Okay, you can just look at the x and y values, at the sign of the x and the y values, and decide which quadrant you're in by simply memorizing, which I really don't support, but memorizing that in quadrant 2, x is negative and y is positive. In quadrant 3, x and y are both negative. In quadrant number 4, x is positive but y is negative. And in quadrant 1, they're both positive. X and y are both positive. Okay, let's finish up the section entitled Introduction to Graphing. Okay, work on these problems and you do just fine.